Aeswil, a alia tilsqui, huelmuch tilsqui, talitaqua, chelqueach, casta skelkale, tali quamasquium, samas scowlets, casta te alis, tel cicela, huliquiltol, tel squi, tel mal, shishgoet, te squi, thil tal. Good day, my name is Alia Warbis. I'm from Chilliwack, and I was raised in my community, the Scout-Kale First Nation. My grandparents are from Musqueam, Sumas, Scowlitz, and Chehalis First Nation. Grand Chief Stephen Point and Dr. Gwen Point are my mother and father. I'd like to thank my son, nieces, and nephews for sharing a song today, representing our nation and upholding our cultural practices. Our culture is critical for our youth success and healing. On Truth and Reconciliation Day, I think it's absolutely critical that we look back at our history. Both healing and change has not been easy, and I know in our communities there is a lot more work to do. Before we continue our journey, taking the exciting and massive steps towards reconciliation, let's take a brief moment and remember all the Indigenous children who never returned home from residential school. Thank you. Today, we're all here to witness the exciting shift in government and relations with Indigenous people to achieve balance and prosperity. It has not been easy to find common ground with the historical injustice and mistrust that's been between us, but I believe when the time is right, the right people will show up. This reminds me of when I met John Rustad. Everything aligned easily. I could feel his passion for making positive change for everyone in British Columbia. John is not afraid to stand by what he believes in. By doing that, he's inspired many people to do the same, including me, and with your help, we'll make BC a better place to live and thrive. I'm humbled to be your candidate for Chilliwack Cultus Lake for the Conservative Party of British Columbia. Together, we'll make history. Now please welcome John Rustad.
Thank you very much, Alia. And I also want to thank Chris Sankey for being here. He's our candidate for the North Coast, and I'm glad that he's able down here to join us today as well as Chief Joey Chapman. I'm very pleased that he is here with us this morning. Economic reconciliation is an important piece in terms of what we need to be doing in this province of British Columbia. And I want to start with a few words from Dr. Joseph Gosnell. Economic development is key to our survival. We are redefining our economic future by combining traditional knowledge with modern business practices. This is not about keeping up, it's about raising the bar for our people. Dr. Joseph Gosnell was an important figure who helped to build the Nisga'a Treaty, but more importantly, push the concepts that First Nations have been held back economically for far too long. And it's high time they have opportunity to not only catch up, but if possible, surpass. And it's a vision that we share as the Conservative Party of British Columbia. It's an important piece, in my opinion, and I think in our party's opinion, in order to unleash what we need to be able to do provincially for all British Columbians. We need to make sure that First Nations can participate fully and engage. To be able to address many of the injustices and many of the problems that we have, it's vital that First Nations engage in the economy, that First Nations have that opportunity to be able to deliver prosperity for its people, rather than what is currently happening. True reconciliation cannot be achieved without economic reconciliation. It's not possible. When you look at what's happened with First Nations in Canadian history, the Canadian government made the decision to take a very more big government approach, owning the land, saying what First Nations can do and can't do, providing funding and resources. The results have been terrible, including the results from residential schools and for the children that did not return. And I think about all of that history, and I think, we need to be mapping a very different course. Since 2017, the NDP's approach has had disastrous effects. It's hard to say this without having a tear in my eye. I'm sorry. Since 2017, the average life expectancy of First Nations has dropped by 6 years. That, to me, is completely unacceptable, that is what is happening with First Nations in BC. The approach that has been taken is an utter failure. This is why we need to be going in a different direction. Laying that foundation for prosperity through economic reconciliation is the path that we believe can unleash the potential for First Nations, and by doing so, unleash the potential of our entire province. First Nations know what they want for their children. They know what they want for the communities. They want to move beyond poverty. They want to be able to manage success. They want to be able to engage. And our goal as a government, should we have that honor of forming government, is not to be the big brother, but to be a partner, to be lifting up First Nations, to work with them and helping them realize their visions for the future and how that can help and prosper for everyone. So part of that, of course, is key with infrastructure within the communities. Many First Nations around this province do not have the housing they need. Some First Nations have struggling just to be able to provide with clean water. So we're going to be partners with First Nations to be able to deliver this. This is actually a responsibility of the federal government. They have been absent. They have not fulfilled that commitment. So as a provincial government, we will step up to the plate and we'll work with First Nations. We'll make sure that gets done, and we will go after the federal government to pay the bill with whatever means we can, legally or otherwise. It's the right thing to do to make sure that First Nations have what they need to be able to be to be able to provide what they need within their communities. Part of this as well, in terms of that key infrastructure, is that sets the stage for First Nations to be able to be healthier within their communities. But we need also to look at the big issue that has been out there for far, far too long, and that is the return of land to First Nations. We are going to be looking at land strategically in terms of returning to First Nations to unleash economic potential. This approach will help to not only address commitments under our Constitution, but it'll help to unleash the potential for First Nations. Land is the basis for which most societies around the world is able to build wealth, is able to build success and prosperity for people. First Nations have been held back for far too long with that, and it's time that that gets addressed. And a Conservative government will be bold in terms of working forward to address what needs to be done. Part of that is using that land strategically for opportunities to be able to create an economy. And so this means opening up different pathways for economic reconciliation, whether it's mining or forestry or other resources, or whether it is perhaps industrial or residential or commercial. There's many, many different paths that different First Nations can take and that may want to take for their people. We need to be able to make sure that we're partners and we're unleashing that potential. We're also going to be investing in new capacity building and infrastructure with First Nations to be able to support First Nations to fully engage in our economy and fully engage in those potentials. One of the things I hear from First Nation leaders over and over again is they would like to have an opportunity to be able to move forward large projects. They would like an opportunity to be able to fully participate. So we'll look at creating a loan guarantee program to be able to support loans for First Nations to be able to be full partners in economic opportunities in major projects in British Columbia. Many First Nations around the province are very engaged, obviously in the land base, all of them are, but many are engaged in forestry as well. And I think it's time that First Nations have the opportunity to be able to fully participate in the forest sector, managing our forest sector and making sure things can be done sustainably. So we're committed to seeing 20% of the volume we have in the province returned back to First Nations to have that opportunity to fully engage in the economy. And a key piece of that is the First Nations will be the landlords of that land. It will not be a land that receives a double stumpage paid to the government plus a fee paid to the First Nations. First Nations will be able to set their own course with regards to that in their future. But of course, a big piece of that, and First Nations have engaged in this for millennia, is about the environment as well. And we want to make sure that we engage in good environmental stewardship as part of moving forward projects and opportunities across the province. When it comes to the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, the Conservative government wants to make sure that it is being upheld the way it was intended. When you look at the debates back in the United Nations and the process that was involved with that, it's very important that that is the spirit in which we do. It needs to guide what we do. It needs to guide how we build our relationships. It needs to guide how we work. However, I also want to note that where there is legislation in British Columbia that creates friction or creates problems that does not allow us to be able to fulfill economic reconciliation, we will actually look to remove that and replace that legislation with legislation that works and makes sense for First Nations. The economy is only one piece of helping and working with First Nations in terms of economic reconciliation. A big piece is to fix much of our history. When you look at what happened with residential schools and then what happens with the 60 Scoop, many children were taken into care. It was deemed that First Nations were not able to raise their children. And that to me is completely wrong. It has had disastrous impacts both on First Nations people, but particularly on families and individuals. So we're committed to working with First Nations to transfer the authority for raising children to First Nations, making sure that we have the structure in place so that children can be raised within their communities, and if there are problems within a particular family, that the community can step up and be part of making sure children can stay within their community and can be raised in their community. And that also means for children that are in care currently, we'll be looking at opportunities to return those children back to First Nations, where First Nations can build out that capacity and support that's needed. And that's something that we'll do as partnership with First Nations. In addition to that, there are many issues, of course, with addictions and overdoses. This has been a huge problem across British Columbia. Today, the number of people that have passed from overdoses, close to 20% of the number of people that have passed have been Indigenous, while only representing 4% of the population. This has been a huge issue, and I've talked with Alia and Chris about this on numerous occasions. We want to work with First Nations to help develop treatment and recovery within First Nations communities themselves, to allow for First Nations to be able to help work and solve this problem, both from a cultural perspective and as well as from the physical perspective of getting rid of the addictions and helping people on a path to recovery. My hope is, as we build out that capacity, there's opportunities for other people who may still be in the trap of many of these downtown cores to be able to look at returning and being part of a cultural healing that can be done to help them on their path to recovery. It's an important piece for helping to build the future. And this is part of a vision that I think we need to all have and we need to all share in British Columbia for reconciliation with First Nations. If we can help in terms of the healing within communities, if we can help in terms of the engagement in the economy, not as government oversight, but as government fully supporting First Nations' own vision, helping to bring that to life, then the words of Dr. Joseph Gosnell will have been fulfilled. It is high time First Nations have that opportunity to be able to engage economically, to be able to succeed, and by doing that, unleashing the full potential for all people in British Columbia, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike, to be able to achieve economic reconciliation in British Columbia. Thank you very much for the opportunity here today. And at this particular point now, I'd like to invite Chief Chapman to come up and share a few words.
Good morning, everybody. OCMCI, Halath Tel Squi, Talito Kwas Skowlitz. I'd really like to thank John for getting up and speaking. Talking about the economic development. We've been so far behind on a lot of the stuff, and it's time for us to move forward as nations. When he talked about the reconciliation and how a lot of the previous governments have failed our people, I come from a small tribe, about 310. Whenever it's time to move forward on something, we're we're always left behind. And a lot of the times, a lot of the funding goes to the bigger tribes, and you know, it's time for us to move forward. You know, there's a lot of stuff that is happening with the Conservatives, and I've really paid attention to a lot of the politics outside of our own, and you know, I'm just happy what the Conservatives are doing and how they're planning on moving forward. You know, I get a little choked up here when I'm thinking about with addictions. I just put away my younger brother back in May, and you know, if you take a look in the valley, in all the nations, we don't have any treatment centers. We don't have any detox centers. Our resources are very limited. You know, and what the Conservative Party is bringing forward, it's only going to make things a lot better. And we need to stop creating the division and start creating unity. We need to move forward, because without each other, we're not going to be able to do that. And I just really want to thank everybody for coming, and I really want to thank John for being here and just letting the people know what the plans are. You know, it's going to take both parties, First Nations chiefs and the Conservative Party, to come together and work together, and that's the only way we're going to get through. Because the world we live in today, we all need to work together to move forward. There's too much out there. And I just want to thank John and the party for letting me speak, and Hachkasiam.
Thank you, Chief Chapman. Thank you, Elliot and John. My name is Chris Sankey. I'm from the community of Lac Kwalams, means Island of Roses. I want to thank the Stolo Nation for allowing me to speak on their territory. I support John's policies around economic reconciliation. It's something that's dear to my heart. You can't have the economic course without the social cart. In this particular instance, we've had the social cart try to pull the economic course, and it's not working. We need to focus on what makes sense and get back to the grassroots movement of our people. Our people understand economic development. They're the ones that are going to come to the table with solutions. They're the ones that are coming to the table with the tools to build the structures required to move forward for economic development. And as I've always said to my friends in Haida Gwaii and Healthsick and the Tsimshian and the municipalities in between, what does your economic course look like to pull your social cart? For me, it's about alignment. When you have alignment amongst First Nation people and the communities, you de-risk the projects, whatever the project may be for that nation. When you de-risk projects, you attract international and domestic investment. And in return, we're able to bring our voices not just in our backyards, but to the rest of the world. I say to my son all the time, think globally and act locally. And that's the position Indigenous communities are in. It's about time we take our rightful place to be a part of Canada and not apart from Canada. And it's taken us so long to get here. And I just want to see the next 7 generations transfer knowledge and wealth for the next 7 generations. I am tired of living and seeing our people struggle. I've been that kid that watching your parents choose the lights and food. And we have to move away from that. We got to move away and move towards self-sufficiency. John's policy embraces Indigenous culture. It embraces self-sufficiency. It embraces independence so that we don't have to rely on government assistance or EI or welfare. That's not who we are. Much like rural Canada, Indigenous people think the same way. We hunt, we fish, we trap. We're about culture and religion and family and environment. We take care of each other. That's who we are. And that's the conservative movement. We're not about this divisiveness. We're supposed to be we, not an us versus them. That's not how this should be. And that's not how I'm running my campaign. I want the people of North Coast Haida Gwaii riding and the people of British Columbia in general. We are inclusive. We've always been inclusive. And I want to see every British Columbian benefit of the opportunities that the Conservative Party is going to bring forward. I am tired of watching people struggle. In particular, of course, residential school was a big stain in Canadian history. All of my family went to residential school. Half of my siblings went to day school. I am a prodigy of residential school. I am not a victim, I am a survivor. And together, if we could just sit across from one another, we're going to have our differences. There is no doubt about we're going to have differences. But at the end of the day, we should be moving in the same direction. How do we bring our people out of poverty so they can start managing wealth and intergenerational knowledge so that for the next 7 generations, we are independent of the government? I like what John is saying. I believe in what John is saying. I believe in this party, and it's about time we break away from the independence. We just want to be a part of the economic engine. And with that said, I want to thank Alia. I want to thank John. I want to thank Chief Chapman and the Stolo Nation. We can do this together because we are stronger together. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to moving forward.